Ellen Skavich. I direct the DeWitt Wallace Center for Communications and Journalism. I'm pleased to welcome here our guest, Mikhail Margelov, who has worked in Russia as Director of Communications for the Yeltsin administration and is currently a political consultant for a number of political candidates. Interviewing Mr. Margelov, in addition to myself, to my right, Professor Bob Conrad of Public Policy Studies, Sanford Institute of Public Policy, and a specialist on tax reform. To his right, Professor Vladimir Tremel, an economist with the Department of Economics at Duke University and co-director of the Duke UNC Slavic Center. So let me begin by asking my colleagues to begin our interview.
I would like to start with a very general but very important, in my mind, question. In the last 6 months or so, we observe more and more vocal anti-American or maybe anti-Western feelings, sentiments in Russia. Now, would be worth discussing, would be interesting to get your opinion. Is it something directed from quote-unquote Kremlin, from the center? Is it genuine public shift? Because, I visited Russia quite often, and particularly in the early 90s or even the late 80s, Americans could do no wrong in Russia. In fact, I felt that the influence of the United States was too strong, too much, but artificial. And now the pendulum is swinging and rather rapidly. So what's your overall assessment of this, Mr. Margelov?
First, I would not agree that the rise of such feelings can be seen for about 6 months or even more. I would say that what you could see before Kosovo crisis was that people felt a kind of confusion about the West, because starting with, say, 1985, 1986 with Perestroika, people were expecting that if the USSR and after that if Russia deals with the West on the terms of partnership, the West will come with a crystal ball, and all the problems will be solved fast and easily, and everybody will be wearing American jeans and drinking Coca-Cola, and it will be a kind of happiness. But the life was very different, and Russians have seen Western consultants, they have seen Western businessmen, they have seen Western aid, or actually they have not seen Western aid, they heard about Western aid. And they saw that some people really got Western cars, foreign passports, nice clothes and things like that. I'm talking just on a very simple level, because if we talk about the growth of, say, anti-Western feelings, of course we should come to that simple level, because that feelings grow among the ordinary people. And the expectations of the majority of the ordinary people failed. They did not feel any improvement of their lives in comparison with what they had in Soviet era. But what we see now, especially after Kosovo crisis has started, and we see that all that anti-Western feelings are being shown very openly. We see that crowds near American Embassy in Moscow, and I'm really surprised that this guy with Kalashnikov has appeared only 2 days ago, but not at the first day of Kosovo crisis, because the level of political extremism in Russian society now is very high. So I think what we can also say is that actually the anti-Western feelings are feelings of confusion. They are not feelings of hatred towards the West or towards America. It's a kind of feeling of confusion. People were expecting too much, and they got something did not get anything. Somebody did not get anything. Somebody got just a very small part of what they expected to get. It's most of all, I think it's a kind of confusion. It's a kind of,
If I may follow up.
Please.
The reason I said 6 months is because, roughly speaking, there was a change in the government. Primakov came in. There was a turn to the left or to the away from reforms, and then, of course, there came the Korean and crisis in Southeast Asia, and the IMF and the World Bank and the U.S. were talking about $50 billion to Korea. $40 billion prior to this to Mexico and so on. Brazil. 30, 40. And then all of a sudden there was a so-called meltdown. And prior to that, IMF, of course, extended 4 or 5 billion, which just disappeared. So among the people I know in Moscow, economists, students of economics, statisticians, so that the late summer of last year was some sort of a watershed, that the U.S. stepped back, and the feeling, again from my friends and colleagues, was that they were responding to an anti-Russian change in the mood in Washington. That's why I said 6 months. In terms of, I've been puzzled. The brother Slavs, I probably am wrong, but I still, when they tell me that sports clubs demonstrate in front of the American embassy, the karate clubs and so on, these guys couldn't find Kosovo on the map.
Of course not.
And the 300-year-old brother Slavs, this sounds to me very artificial.
Every day I was working. I was driving to my office, and I drive nearby the American embassy, and I saw these crowds. Of course, the number of skinheads, the number of football fans was enormous, but you could also see many people of old age with red flags, and this is I would say an typical support group of communist demonstrations. So these people can find Kosovo on a map, and they remember history quite well. So, of course, as it always happens with any demonstration in Moscow, as it, for example, was happening in 1993 near the Russian White House, there are some people who come to the demonstration as they come to the happening or to the show. They drink beer, they laugh, they joke, they just, having a good time. And there are people who come to the demonstration as they come to work, with red flags, with slogans, with Stalin portraits. And what makes me feel, so to say, nervous a little bit is that the majority of the demonstrators were not young skinheads. It was that tough-liners and hard-liners. And these are the people who really support Primakov as a prime minister. And this is the major problem. The major problem is not do we see demonstration near the American embassy or not? Was the guy with Kalashnikov a kind of a KGB provocation, or was it a real person who really wanted to steal police-owned jeep, which I can hardly believe how can that happen, and can find Kalashnikov and start shooting in the center of Moscow. But anyway, what is really dangerous is the attitude of Primakov and his team to the West and I'm really afraid that Mr. Primakov has wrong friends, like Saddam Hussein and Mr. Milosevic. And this is a problem. You know, Primakov's team is rather peculiar. The people whom he recruits to his team, they are strangers for the political, I would say, political atmosphere which we were seeing in Russia since 1991, because the majority of them are Russian Soviet intelligence officers, and they have their certain attitude towards what is happening in the world. They have their own attitude of the global policy, and this is really this makes this makes the so to speak the color of Russian government a little bit different. And I would say that the expectations of Russian elites that the West will help in any situation, of course, what you have seen in the late summer, these expectations, they failed, and of course people felt a kind of confusion, a kind of disaster. But these feelings, I think they have gone, and if you talk to Russian elite now, of course they are critical towards the West, but they are critical towards anybody. That's a very typical thing for Russian intelligentsia, you know that. But I think that more serious is an attitude of common people who normally vote during the elections. And the very serious thing is what we see is what we see as Primakov's team now. I cannot say that there are some feelings, anti-Western feelings in the Kremlin, because in the Kremlin, if we look at the Kremlin as presidential administration, it is still full of, so to speak, I would not say very broad-minded people maybe, but people who understand that there's no, we're not living in the Cold War period anymore. But the problem is that in the White House and the residence of Russian government, there are people who still think the Cold War way, and that's dangerous, really.
And the conspiracy sort of supporters.
That's right. That's right.
Related to the anti-Western feeling, perhaps, are the prospects for reform. Since the August 17th events, the reformers, as you know, have attempted to form a coalition. Mr. Gaidar, Mr. Fedorov, Mr. Chubais, among others, Mr. Kiriyenko. And I wanted to ask 3 questions about your views on this coalition. One is whether or not you think the current crisis in Kosovo and the international relationship between Russia and the United States and this anti-American feeling will have any effect on their potential for success in the fall Duma elections.
No, I don't think that these two things have anything in common, because you mentioned Kiriyenko. Kiriyenko is not involved in the coalition with Chubais, Gaidar, Fedorov, and other, so to speak, reformers. The resource of Kiriyenko is, the resource of Kiriyenko for the reformers is that in that the majority of people, as the polls show, they do not look at Kiriyenko as at one of reformers of, so to speak, Chubais or Gaidar wave. And Lebed can easily talk to Kiriyenko, Lushkov can easily talk to Kiriyenko, and Kiriyenko has a unique opportunity to talk to some people even among communists. So I think that for the reformers, if they use a strategy, I would say, let's call it a dual strategy or duplex strategy. So if they go 2 ways, if they go with Chubais coalition, which is called Pravaya Delo, and which will unite the pro-Western liberal forces, and I think they will succeed in getting 5% or a little bit more. But, because the polls show that there is a certain, very limited but certain amount of people in Russia who really have liberal values in their minds and who are, so to speak, Western-minded and so on and so forth. But Kiriyenko is another resource for reformers, and I think it will be used another way. Kiriyenko will be used as a resource for different coalitions with non-communist forces. I would not call them reformers or Western-minded reformers. Forget it, you know. If you look at Lebed or if you look at Lushkov, you will never tell that these people can be pro-Western or something like that. But if the reformers succeed in making a sort of alliance between Kiriyenko, Lebed and his party, because Lebed will never go to Duma, maybe Lushkov and his party, because Lushkov himself will never go to Duma. So that can be a kind of success for reformers if Kiriyenko gets a position of, I don't know, Speaker of the House, or even First Vice Speaker of the House. Because if you control the Duma apparatus, if you control the Duma management, so to speak, you have a kind of 50% of success in pushing this or that law through Duma. This is what communists do now, having Seleznov as the Speaker of the House. So I think that even if Chubais and his coalition gets about 5%, if Yavlinsky gets up to 15%, I'm not sure that he will get more, the reformers will not lose if they succeed in, I would say, pushing Kiriyenko by all their muscles and guts to the certain high level in Duma. What surprised me, actually, when we made polls around Russia and when we were asking people, do they think that Kiriyenko is to blame for the crisis of the 17th of August, people were saying no. They were blaming bankers, they were blaming some dark forces somewhere in the West, and they were blaming anybody, but they were treating Kiriyenko as a wise guy from province who was recruited to Moscow, squeezed and kicked out. And this can be a resource for reformers, I think.
You answered my second question in part, so let me combine the other two. First is, do you think this coalition can stay together through the elections and after? And if they do stay together, do you think that they will get the necessary 5% so that they can participate?
You mean what coalition? You mean the Chubais coalition?
Yeah.
Well, I think that what I can see from the inside of that coalition, I think Chubais could convince all the members of that alliance to play one game. Only Boris Fedorov is trying to play his own game, especially when he says that he is planning to go to Moscow region governor's position elections. But I think that they will convince him not to do that during this summer because he will just spend funds for nothing, because the situation in Moscow region is controlled by Lushkov, and I'm not sure that the reformers have enough funds to fight with Lushkov on the level of Moscow region, because it's not that important. Then there is another strong candidate who goes to the position of Moscow region governor, who is supported by Yabloko, by Yavlinsky. And even this guy can be a candidate of the non-communist forces. So there is a field where they can reach certain agreements with non-communist forces. But I think that seeing that Chubais controls the situation inside the coalition now, and seeing that the way the team of political consultants which works with this coalition works with them, and it is a Video International team which is headed by Maxim Boyko. The way the work is organized in that team make me confident that even if the members of the coalition can at a certain level of the campaign can lose the opportunity to talk to each other because everybody is genius, everybody is a very big person. On the level of experts, on the level of consultants, the discussion will go on, and neither Chubais nor Maxim Boyko will allow them to show openly the fact that they disagree or on any matter or things like that. So I hope that there will be a kind of discipline inside that team. It's hard to believe in that, but it seems like it's a doable program to make them to be disciplined and not to show their unique features every second, like Boris Nemtsov likes. So when Video International started working with them, Maxim Boyko said that the major problem is to convince Nemtsov not to wear white trousers every day. So, if it's a doable program, so.
I'd like to ask you, when you served as communications chief for Boris Yeltsin, I recall that you were supposed to come to Duke University.
That's right.
Earlier, and you sent us a telegram that you could not. And then Viktor Chernomyrdin, then Prime Minister, was fired, President Yeltsin, and you left at the same time.
That's right.
My question is, what were the most important problems you had as communications chief for Boris Yeltsin? And what do you think, if anything, you're able to achieve? What were the advantages and the important aspects of being in that job?
You know, when we came to the presidential administration as a team, I would not say I came, because we always work as a team of political consultants, and when we came to the presidential administration and formed that directorate of political communications, so we came at the time when Anatoly Chubais was the head of presidential administration and Maxim Boyko was his deputy. So it was a very easy situation for me when I could work with the president, treating him as a client, as I normally work. And, you know, it was a kind of Western style of management inside the administration, brought there by Chubais and by Boyko. And it was nice to feel that the client was listening attentively to what you were saying to him. Of course, he was doing his own judgments and was acting the way he wanted to act. But it was very important to know that somebody is listening to what you are saying to him and reading what you are writing, yeah? Your analysis. And that was the period when the president was addressing to the nation by radio every week. And I think that was of the most important thing and one of the most advantages of the period after the elections of 1996, because at that time the president and presidential administration was trying to explain to the people what it was doing, and was trying to make the presidential power kind of transparent. Then in 1997, 1998, the annual message to the parliament of the president of Russia was widely publicized and widely advertised, and I think, well, normally the message of the president to the parliament, the annual message of the president to the parliament, is read by 10 or 15 experts, or maybe by some deputies. But these 2 years, in these 2 years, I think much more people got to know what is the address of the president to the parliament, and it's written down in the constitution that every year president should address the parliament with, you know, so that. And then after Chubais left the administration and went to the government, and then Boyko left, and the administration, you know, has become a kind of let's say, it lost its, the presidential administration lost its, say, management, maybe, because the way the decisions were made at Yumashev's times were...
This is his chief of staff.
Yeah, Valentin Yumashev, were the decisions which were made, in a very closed atmosphere, and step by step the idea of transparency was forgotten. So, and our team decided that, well, especially when it came obvious that the resignation of Chernomyrdin and the appointment of Kiriyenko will be done, I would say, in a kind of medieval way, so like it was done in medieval centuries, without any PR preparation, without any campaign explaining why it is necessary to make Chernomyrdin resign and why is it necessary to replace him with young Sergei Kiriyenko. And at that time, when we were looking at Sergei Kiriyenko as a candidate, we were, we were in a kind of shock because nobody knew him, nobody could predict what could happen in the parliament during these 3 tours of adoption or non-adoption. So it was a kind of the situation where we could hardly manage we could hardly manage the situation at that time, and nobody wanted to make any preparations for the decisions, and nobody was thinking about so to speak, post-campaign. What the explanation of campaign of what will be the steps of the new government, what will be the strategy of Kiriyenko, and so on and so forth. So we decided to leave the presidential administration, and we did that, but I would say in a month our team was recruited again, but it was recruited by the Russian White House. My first deputy, Alexei Volin, who was my first deputy in the presidential administration, has become a head of the of the Department of Government Information in Kiriyenko's government, and our team started working with Sergei Kiriyenko. So for us it was quite a strange situation, but it was a kind of a long discussions with Chubais, with Valentin Yumashev, with some other people. So it's not a secret anymore that our team was helping Sergei Kiriyenko in his PR and his communications when he was a prime minister. And now we still work with Sergei Kiriyenko as political candidate. So I'm in charge of the big segment of work in regional press. We are doing a lot of analysis for Kiriyenko, and we will be involved in political advertising campaign.
Just to follow up a little bit, much as has been written about the influence of the family, a president who has weakened, President Yeltsin. Did you yourself actually deal personally with any of the family members of the president?
Yes, of course.
And in what way? Could you tell us how it worked?
Actually, when I was in charge of the communications department, well, first I had a unique opportunity to meet with the president every week himself when we were recording his radio address to the nation. And before the recording and after that, we had about 15 or 20 minutes of talk. Normally, he was asking me some questions about what are the ideas of the second address, of the next radio address to the nations. What do we advise to talk about? What are our ideas and so on. So it was a kind of useful, and for me it was very useful because I could see the way Yeltsin thinks and the way he treats different things. Of course, we were dealing with Tatiana Dyachenko as President Yeltsin's advisor.
His daughter.
His daughter, the daughter of the president. Sometimes when we were recording this every week address to the nation at Yeltsin's dacha, we had an opportunity to talk to his wife, to Naina Iosifovna. But I can hardly say that it's true when some journalists say that President Yeltsin does what Tatiana tells him. I disagree with that point because as I saw, Yeltsin listens very attentively to what his advisors, to what his consultants say to him, but he makes the decision. For example, when the former head of presidential administration, Nikolai Bardyuzha, was made to resign, it was an idea of President Yeltsin himself, and when he expressed that idea to some of his advisors, I know it for sure, it was a kind of shocking among the advisors, or it was a kind of question why and how should we be prepared for that and who will be the next and so on and so forth. But he made that decision and he made it fast. So I do not agree when people say that President Yeltsin is I would say for 100% under control of Valentin Yumashev and Tatiana Dyachenko. That's not true. That's not true. There is an influence of the family, of course, but I think it's a kind of, you should not forget.
Often by their spouses, particularly the last one.
There's a big difference between real Tsar and Communist Party Tsar.
But of course, she was a young girl by the time they got to Moscow, by the time Yeltsin got to the Politburo. She was a mature, intelligent, and again, I'm repeating what I hear from all my colleagues. Yeltsin was losing touch with the reality. He didn't have as many channels offering him information, and that's where Tatiana became quite important. And he may have disagreed, but I've heard a number of occasions that she suggested strongly, I'm recommending that. And since he wasn't particularly concerned, I was told that he's spending less and less time on what he considers to be secondary matters. If Tatiana says, let's do it this way, he would agree. But probably, would have to wait for 50 years until all the papers are open, because particularly in terms of family relations.
No, I agree with you. What concerns so-called secondary matters, sometimes the president even does not pay any attention to them. And of course, when I say that he makes main decisions himself, of course I talk about main decisions. For some people, even before 1996, like for Korzhakov, for example, the head of his personal security, and some other people, it was not difficult to push this or that decision which they were thinking was good for them or for anybody else from their team. Of course, it's possible, but and sometimes that so-called secondary matters costed a lot. but from the point of view of what the president considers to be important or not important. So the decisions which he considers to be important, of course, they are made by him himself. But there are a lot of secondary matters, and I agree with you with that.
We have time for, I think, one quick question.
Oh.
Bob, did you want to ask a question?
I wanted to ask about your plans in terms of the elections for the work in the regions. It seems that one of the more difficult problems in Russia is the split between the center and the regions. And in terms of campaign strategy, what types of strategies do you plan to develop during the fall to address the problems in the regions?
You know, our team works with 4 clients in the regions who will take part in governors' elections. And of course, there are 4 different strategies. And 3 of these 4 regions are very difficult. The fight will be really tough because the competitors are really serious and they are supported by local financial institutions and local, I would say, local important people, let's call them that way. In one region, the situation is rather simple, and the candidate which we are working with, I think he is the only candidate who has chances. He is governor now, and he is really the only person who is, I mean, on the political stage, who is respected by all the political forces, because he's a unique guy. He does not, he is not involved in any economic disputes in the region, and that's why the business community supports him, because he, well, he does not have, so to say, preferred banks or preferred financial institutions in the region. So I think that among the 4 of our clients, for the 3 of them, it will be a hard time, and so we started working in March, which is very early for the campaign. We started with polls, we started with creating strategies, we started with the analysis of of the situation in the regions. You know, we have a unique opportunity to deal with the regional press, because from the time of working at presidential administration, we and before that, from the time of campaign of 1996, we established unique relations with regional media society. So I think it will be like that.
Thank you very much. Our guest, Mikhail Margelov, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Professor Tremmel,
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank
Conrad.
you.
Thank you very much.